Hopefully you can hear me. Oh, here we go. We're just going to open up our slideshow right now.
Sorry about this.
That's okay. All right, fantastic. So welcome everybody. Happy Tuesday. And thank you for joining the Community Orchard Network for our fourth webinar on urban orchards. My name is Susan Poisner, and I'm the director of orchardpeople.com, a fruit tree education website. And I'm going to be the moderator for the webinar today. So let's talk about community orchards and food forest programs. Whether you're a new or an experienced orchardist, there is always so much to learn. And through these webinars, our goal is to bring in experts and share ideas. As we go through the webinar today, please do feel free to chime in with your questions in the comment box, and we'll leave time to discuss them at the end of each presentation. Also remember, there is always room to start discussions on our Community Orchard Network Google group. Everybody who signed up for this webinar was automatically made a member of the group. If you know anyone else who might want to join in, they can send an email to Max from AC Trees at the email orchard@actrees.org. And perhaps Max will put that in the chat box so that you can see it. So very briefly, what is the agenda for today? It's very simple. We have two speakers, and each of them will have about 20 minutes for their presentations. Then we'll have 5 minutes or so for your questions after each talk. So our first speaker is Michael Phillips, author of The Holistic Orchard. And then we'll chat with Barb Burrell of City Fruit in Seattle, who will tell us about her experience in restoring old orchards. But first, a little bit of fun. We're going to do some polls with you guys so we can understand a little bit about you, more about you and your experience. So I'm going to introduce Max here, who will talk us through the polls.
Hello, everyone. We have two polls before
Are you
Michael
there,
starts
Max?
today. Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, wonderful. So we have two polls before Michael begins his presentation today. The first poll question is, do you use holistic sprays on your trees? The poll is now active. We'll give you 15 seconds for everyone to answer the question. And the potential answers are yes, no, and not yet, but I would like to try. A couple more seconds. And we are closing the poll. Sharing the results on screen. 13% answered yes, 13% answered no, and 74% answered not yet, but I would like to try. Wonderful. Okay, next question before we get started is, are your orchard trees healthy? And that poll is now active. The potential responses are yes, the fruit tree we are growing is perfect. The second one is no, seeing all sorts of diseases. And the third one is eager to learn more. A few seconds left on that before I close the poll. All right. Seems that 20% of you have very healthy trees, 8% are seeing some disease, and 72% are eager to learn what they can do to make their trees as healthy as possible. Those results are shared on your screen now. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Susan.
Okay, super. So do I get to click here, Max? I'm going to click to the next slide. I think so. Let's see what happens. Oh, no, I don't think it's working. I think you're going to have to change the slide then.
Here, sorry, Susan. Sorry about that technical difficulty, everyone. Susan, you now have keyboard and mouse controls.
Okay, thanks. I'll just have them for a bit, then I'm going to give them to Michael. So I've just clicked. Oh, okay. So just briefly before I give the mic over to Michael, I just wanted to summarize a little bit. Most of us know who he is, but just a little summary. He's known across the country for helping people grow healthy fruit. His website, which I think we've got in our chat box, is www.groworganicapples.com. And it's a great place to immerse yourself in the holistic approach to orcharding. His Lost Nation orchard is part of a medicinal herb farm in northern New Hampshire. And Michael's newest book, The Holistic Orchard, Tree Fruits and Berries the Biological Way, recently received Garden Book of the Year honors from the American Horticultural Society. So Michael, welcome. You are on the air. Now let's see if we can hear Michael. Oh, I think he's still muted. Are you there, Michael? Okay, I think we're having some more technical difficulties here, so let's see if Max is going to be able to help us.
It appears that Michael may have lost his connection to the GoToWebinar control panel. I think what we should do is kind of just move on and
Sure.
maybe go into Barb's presentation.
Okay,
And
sure. Can you flip through to Barb or shall I?
yeah, I can do that.
Okay,
Hello.
super. Oh, he's
Oh,
here. Yay,
there we
we've
go.
got him.
I don't know where I went, but I'm back in northern New Hampshire. Hello, everybody.
Yay! Oh my goodness, how wonderful. Okay, Michael, so talk us through your talk, Holistic Sprays. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I'd like to just start with the notion of understanding there are many pests, there are many diseases, there are all sorts of challenges, and different things come up at different places. And we either deal with those things allopathically with some kind of toxin, basically, whether it's an organic toxin or a chemical toxin, to deal with the symptoms of pests and disease. A whole nother approach is to really support the fruit tree nutritionally and biologically. And that is what I call the holistic spray, that we're working with natural systems and we're doing this with things that are healthy for the ecosystem, for the tree, and for us. So in getting into this, we really need to understand what makes for a healthy plant. The tree is out there, those green leaves make sugars through photosynthesis. And that whole process is efficient if all the trace minerals are available to the tree. And the tree goes on from there to combine nitrogen with the plant sugars. Nitrogen, this is a little deep, but I'm just going to run through this quick. Nitrogen comes in two forms, either as nitrate, which makes the tree more susceptible to disease, or as ammonium, which the tree works with in a better way to create complete proteins. And that whole part has a lot to do with the fact that complete proteins, a tree doesn't get disease near as much as when that process is incomplete. And again, this sounds a little deep, but we're going to get to a really simple understanding of what we need to do. From there, plants go on to make all kinds of phytochemicals that basically are their immune function. And a lot of these chemicals we use as herbalists, my wife Nancy and I are herbalists as well, to work with our own bodies. So this is the place that we want to get our plants to. And it all really basically comes down to being in the right soil ecosystem. We need a place where the fungal biomass is 10 times greater than the bacterial biomass. And all I'm saying here is we need to kind of have a little bit of awareness of what are the right kind of fungi we want to find in our soil, and then how do we go about feeding those fungi, supporting those fungi. And this is where you get into talking about hardwood, wood chips, and all the various things I speak about in my book and on the website to create basically what is a forest edge ecosystem. And if we create all those natural advantages, that in turn means we can work more with the health aspects of the fruit tree to grow the fruit that we want to feed to our friends and our neighbors and our communities. So it sounds a little complicated going in, and it's really fascinating stuff, but the key is that we want this fungal-dominated soil ecosystem around our trees. We want it to be exactly like you would experience on the edge of the forest, though we, of course, are not planting our trees on the edge of the forest. But that's where a fruit tree wants to be in its own right in terms of getting all these health connections. Now, one of the amazing microbes, grouping of microbes that's down there, is something called the mycorrhizal fungi. And mycorrhizae have this symbiotic relationship with the roots of about 90% of the plants on this planet. Mycorrhizae deliver nutrients to the fruit tree in exchange for those plant sugars produced by photosynthesis. Mycorrhizae can also bring water to the fruit tree from as much as 100 times away when things are getting more dried out. Mycorrhizae help protect the fruit tree from diseases in the soil, and mycorrhizae also, in connecting from plant to plant in different fruit trees, can signal to other fruit trees, oh, there's a disease here, there's a pest here, we should be on alert, we need to do something. And that realm in itself is a whole amazing world. One of the things you can do when you first get bare root trees is dip them in a mycorrhizal inoculant, just to make sure that you have that type of fungal species growing where you're going to plant your fruit trees. Because often where we put trees, whether it's in a lawn, it's in a converted cornfield, the pasture, the abandoned lot, these are not fungally dominated places. We have to build that fungal ecology. And mycorrhizae is really the first step. So in getting all these advantages in place, we're creating trees that are producing those phytochemicals that help the fruit tree stand up to disease in the first place. And if plants didn't have this ability, out there in the environment, they would have succumbed a long, long time ago. Just like our bodies are meant to be healthy, given all the good karma that's out there and good food and rest, plants are meant to be healthy. Disease is more of an indication that something is awry with the biology and on the nutrition front. So this phytochemistry, the big word is phytoalexins, that's the immune function of the plant. It's triggered by the presence of some disease. We can always count on that. It's enhanced by the plant having reserve energy, which it's going to get in that fungally dominated soil ecosystem. And then there are certain things that help induce this response. And that's where we get to the concept of the holistic sprays. What are the things that might induce more of this immune defense against disease? So this is what I call my NRA moment. And that's the fact that the sprayer is used to deliver, yes, in some cases, toxins, but in other cases, good food, good biology. It's not the sprayer that's a problem, it's what we put into the sprayer. So I'm just saying that to encourage some of you to think maybe a little bit of spraying of good stuff has merit, and we might want to consider that in working with the trees we're planting in our urban orchards. So, in thinking anew about disease, and basically, I should title this slide, Thinking Anew About Health, we want to learn and understand how to enhance the tree's immune response, because out there, regardless of where we are, rain happens, fungal disease spores are released, they land on the surface of the plant, and you might be dealing with apple scab, you might be dealing with brown rot on your peaches, but there's a springboard, and those spores are going to come every season, and so we want trees that can stand up to that. Another part of this is the notion of creating a competitive fungal and bacterial environment on the surface of the leaf and on the surface of the fruit. And this is all about more microbe diversity. And when we have a good crowd in place, as we're going to learn in a few more slides, that has a big leg up on basically making no room at the inn for the disease to get a foothold. I'm asking it to advance, but it's not advancing. We'll get there. So what are we going to be spraying on the tree? They really come down into a few different groupings of things. Mineral nutrition, fatty acids, which we're going to get from certain good fats, and microbe diversity. And what I call the holistic core recipe, consists of pure neem oil, and I'm going to explain each one of these. Fish hydrolysate, seaweed, and some version of microbial inoculant. And it's kind of a simple approach once you see how the pieces fit together. The important thing is to understand nuance, because not all neem is neem. There are many different neem extracts out there. So here is a oil that is pressed from the seeds of a tree that grows in India, Northern Africa, Southeast Asia, Southern California, South Florida. And I use this basically for threefold reasons. One of the amazing things about neem, and this is the only plant I know that produces this constituent, there are these azadirachtin compounds that work to inhibit the molting cycle of insects. So insects go from egg to larva to pupa to adult. This has basically a stopping aspect to preventing an insect from advancing in its juvenile stages. And so this works phenomenally against things like aphids and mites and all the different moths that get after the fruit. So that's kind of like a bonus aspect to neem. What I really like are the fats that are in neem. These fatty acids are what feed the good fungi in the soil and feed the good microbes on the surface of the plant. Neem also contains a bunch of terpenoids, and that's another one of those herbal constituent words that is in that immune function category, and it helps induce that same response on the part of the fruit tree. So I get my neem from that website you see there, neemresource.com. Neem below 60 degrees is like butter. So there's some tricks of the trade, so to speak, that you can read about in the book, and again on my website at groworganicapples.com. Many things will be referenced on that website. So I go on from neem to the fish component. Now, liquid fish is what is officially known as fish hydrolysate. This is basically an unpasteurized, cold processed fish. And fish, when it comes with all its fatty oils, is going to provide all kinds of enzymes and hormones that fuel the biology. This is totally different from what's called fish emulsion that you might get from an organic supplier. Many places have both, but you have to just understand, I'm talking about basically more the cold processed living fish that comes with all the nutrition to make what we want to happen work. And one of the ways that you can tell really quick is because fish is a fertilizer, it has an NPK number, and that's those three numbers that represent nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And when the first number, the nitrogen number, is 2 or 3, it will be a true liquid fish, a true fish hydrolysate. But when that number is more like 5, a higher percentage of nitrogen in the fertilizer, that's going to be a fish emulsion. So that's an easy way that you can tell what you're looking for. Then there's seaweed extract. This comes either as a dry powder or as liquid kelp. And what we're basically getting from the seaweed is a mega vitamin pill for the tree. It's filled with all kinds of minerals and amino acids and hormones. The one advantage of liquid kelp, and this might be relevant to some of you who are still waiting for bloom or just in the midst of it, if a very cold night is threatened and the temperatures are going to drop down to 28, 27 degrees, 26, 25 degrees, speaking Fahrenheit here, that is the point where you might lose 90% of your blossoms at 25 degrees. Liquid kelp, because it's cold processed, contains the polysaccharides that are in the kelp plant. And that basically works as a plant antifreeze, and it can gain you 2 to 4 degrees of frost protection if sprayed the night before that cold, the afternoon before that cold comes on in the middle of the night. So that's something I always have in hand, just because you never know in spring. Do I need to do something to protect my blossoms from a spring freeze? But the thing that's really exciting to me in seaweed is the cytokinin hormones. And cytokinins trigger the production of flavonoids in plants. And flavonoids are another herbal constituent that have a lot to do with the plant's ability to resist disease. So simply by adding seaweed to your spray mix, you're getting all this kind of different activity that's going to be good for you trying to grow healthy fruit. Now let's get a little deeper for just a minute in terms of what's going on in terms of surface biology. Some of you probably recognize that picture. That's a peach tree, and that is the disease called peach leaf curl. In nature, when canopy colonization is on the order of 70%, the different benign bacteria and fungi have the ability to outcompete disease-causing organisms. The thing that happens is that many things work against canopy colonization, from extreme heat to ultraviolet radiation to acid rain. We can't do anything about that. Canopy colonization can get as low as 2 to 3%, especially in industrial agriculture, where plants are constantly treated with fungicides. Nitrate fertilization also depletes the microbes being able to exist up there. And then there's also the fact that food resources sometimes are simply depleted on the surface of the plant. And that's where those fatty acids come in with the neem oil and the fish. We want to provide food resources. But we also want to make sure that we keep rather full canopy colonization in place. And one of the things that I use is something called effective microbes. Now, some people use compost tea. There's different ways of going about this. But what we want to do is reinforce that biology because many things work against it. So here's a case where if we have a biological deficiency, we either make up for it by using more spray medicines in the form of fungicides, and I know most of us are trying to not grow that way, or we recognize how nature does it, and we make sure that we have good canopy colonization. Effective microbes is something that contains 3 groupings of organisms. There are the photosynthetic bacteria, and they're very good at basically producing food from the air, so that helps feed everybody. The lactic acid bacteria, anyone who's eaten a pickle or had sauerkraut, you know lactic acid bacteria prevents your preserves from spoiling. Lactic acid bacteria are also good at helping decompose organic matter. So my sprays drip on the ground, that's good for down there as well. They also play a big role in improving the utilization of calcium and phosphorus. And this is what makes a plant stronger in terms of basically its covering, its cuticle layer. And that also plays a role in preventing rots and things like that. And then there are the yeasts, basically the bulk of the crowd, so to speak. And any of you who've pressed apple juice from your apples and let it sit and ferment, and it became hard cider, know that there are yeast there already. We're just making sure there's plenty of them. So effective microbes is something I get from Terraganics. You can also get it from SCD Probiotics. And again, on the Grow Organic Apples website, there's a resource page, and you'll find links to many of these things. But it's very simple to use, and that's kind of the key to my presenting to you this notion of basically a core recipe for the holistic sprays. So this rate page is also something you'll find on the website. There's one of the web tabs on the left-hand menu says biologic curriculum, and you click there and you'll see an article on holistic spray ingredients, and you'll find this very recipe given. But assuming you have a 4-gallon backpack sprayer, you're going to want to mix 2.5 ounces of pure neem oil. You have to first emulsify that neem oil separately with some liquid dish soap, just so that it will mix into water. This is a rate that gives you 0.5% concentration, so that's enough to feed the troops and trigger that immune response, but not so much oils that it will burn the leaf. So we have to be careful to keep it to 0.5% concentration. 10 ounces of liquid fish, 3 tablespoons of, I use the words here, mother culture of effective microbes. That's basically the product you buy from the manufacturer. you can actually brew this and really make it economical. And maybe that's something a group in one city might think, yeah, we could do this centrally and then distribute it to the different growers in our network and save a lot of money. That's the amazing thing about this effective microbes. But you can also use the culture you get direct from the manufacturer. A little molasses helps launch the crowd, so to speak. And finally, either 5 tablespoons of liquid kelp or half an ounce of the seaweed extract. And the whole idea here is we are putting a nutritional wallop and a biological force back in place on the surface of the tree at the prime moments when disease is likely to show up. Now, I said earlier, there are many, many different diseases. They come at different points in the season. Many of the primary infection fungi come in the spring. So when I describe the spring sprays, I'm basically talking when things first green up and at pink going into the flower stage and right at petal fall and a week after. And there you're covering the major risk of things like apple scab and pear scab. Summer sprays are where you're focused more on addressing rots and the aesthetic fungi, things like sooty blotch and fly speck, which are actually not a big deal. You know, I have to think about that as a commercial grower, but if you just teach people, you spit on your apple and you rub it on your shirt, a lot of that comes off. It again, is no big deal. But all along, the holistic sprays are not just dealing with disease, but they're building up the nutrition in the fruit as well. That's really a cool part. Fall sprays are when I address fungal diseases that overwinter in buds, like that peach leaf curl, and also direct some of the sprays at the ground beneath the tree just to help decompose leaves. All those pieces of the puzzle, again, on the website, go to the newsletter button, and in the February newsletter of this year, I describe this more in detail so you can get a bigger handle of what I'm talking about. You know, as a kind of a basic first approach, my recommendation is that you definitely want to proceed with those spring sprays and cover that primary infection window when things like apple scab, cedar apple rust first get a hold of the disease. Going beyond there, there's 30 days or so right after petal fall when this slide looks a little messed up for some reason, but anyway, in this 35 days right after petal fall, rots come into play, rust is still running out its cycle. This is the time when flower cells are forming for next year on pear and apple trees, so nutrition is very important. It also has great relevance to the pests that are after your fruit. And when you're dealing with the holistic sprays, and you think about, okay, neem oil, which is used in hand lotions, think about seaweed, what's almost a food, liquid fish, I don't think any of us are going to take a drink of it, but it is a food too for the plants. Beyond that, we have the microbes, which that's a big part of our body's way of defending itself as well. I do other things beyond that in the summer, and I get into making herbal teas, and some of you might be fascinated by that and do that, but if you focus on that front end of the season with nutritional and biological sprays, that's going to do a lot of good. And beyond there, right before the fruit is harvested, one little tip I'll just throw out there, if you're dealing with brown rot on cherries, or your fruit is splitting, brown rot on apricots, brown rot on peaches, 2 weeks out, a week out before the fruit's ready to eat, suddenly it all rots, that would be brown rot. Well, adding milk to the holistic sprays at a 10% dilution addresses that in a big way because milk adds to the calcium factor. But regardless of what disease we're talking about, we are, and there are many, it's still all about tree immune response, nutrient balance. Those mycorrhizal fungi are in charge of nutrient balance. We don't have time to talk about that, but that is an amazing part of the story. And keeping full canopy colonization on the order of 70% so that there's no room at the end for disease. simple stuff, healthy things to use, basically foods, and we have incredible fruit. And I think maybe that's about my time, and we go on to questions if we're ready for that, Susan.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much for that little taste. Sometimes getting somebody to nurture us through, like you just did, makes it a little less frightening for us. So that's great. I've got some questions coming in. I want to encourage everyone to write in their questions. So I've got a question here. This is interesting. Michael, what is your recommendation for a peach dwarfing rootstock that would enable the tree to not be susceptible to PTSL?
PTSL.
I
Tell
know,
me
I'm a
what
little baffled by that too. I'm wondering what that is. I thought you would know.
peach tree short life. I think that's peach tree short life.
Okay.
Peaches, we don't have as much of a selection of dwarfing rootstocks in that way. And I am not as versed in what you're asking me about right now, but to tell you that when we're dealing with diseases in the soil brought on by nutritional deficiencies, just says look into mycorrhizae, look into a fungally dominated soil ecosystem, look into extreme nutrient balance. That's one I can maybe get back to you if you email me separately, and you can find that link on the website. But right now, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so that person that sent that in, we will definitely get them to email you directly. So everybody else, please send in your questions. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you two things. First of all, do you have to be careful and use different sprayers for every different thing that you spray? Is there a danger of, I don't know, the chemicals in each spray mixing and becoming something toxic?
So in my case, when I describe this holistic recipe, that's all going in the same sprayer. If you are using certain living biology sprays, and by that I mean things like Sparinade, you have to be aware of not putting copper in the same tank because it's going to kill some of the good microbe aspects of that other product. If you get into occasionally using chemicals, I think that you can successfully flush your tank and your lines. Whenever I do a holistic spray, because of the fats and the neem and the fish, it's just a good practice to flush your lines. And I get the Citrix, which is a citrus-based degreaser soap that you can find in health food stores, co-ops. A few drops, add a little more water and spray it through the lines will clean it up. That's going to clean up chemical sprays as well. But kind of in a bigger sense, your question, what goes in the sprayer also comes out of the sprayer. And when you do more and more with chemistry, I think you do run into great concerns about, all right, this one thing alone is called safe, but what happens when 2 or 3 things are brought together? And something to really think about.
Exactly. And sometimes, some groups may just decide to have different sprayers for different purposes. I know that's what we do, but we've got another question that's come in here as well. So somebody writes, our community orchard is on the edge of a woodland. Have you any suggestions beyond resistant stock for cedar apple rust? So that's something that they're grappling with, cedar apple rust. What sprays might help?
Cedar apple rust is a fungal disease that shares its cycle with the eastern red cedar. And in the spring, from those orange galls on the eastern red cedar, the spores come and land on the tree of the apple. And from about bloom through petal fall to about 3 weeks after is the window when that might happen. So the holistic sprays are going to reinforce the defenses of the tree. The one kind of trick of the trade you might try within that is on really strong wetting events, and here I'm talking about rain releases the spores. During the very tail end of that wetting, to do a bicarbonate spray, potassium bicarbonate, a product like Armacarb, which is kind of an offshoot of baking soda. that neutralizes the surface of the leaf and seems to be really effective against spores once they've germinated and started to take hold. So if you're in a really high pressure area, you might look into that.
Okay, perfect. Unfortunately, that's about it for questions right now. But Michael, what we were thinking is perhaps that people could submit their questions to our Google group, and we'll send those on to you, and maybe or you can answer a few of them. People can also email you directly, can they not?
People can do a question or two. That's kind of my pledge, is I'll try to answer a question or two for everybody, but I also will add that it may not be an immediate answer because things are so busy right now, and I have all kinds of consultations going on and what have you. But eventually I try to get back to everybody.
Well, thank you so very, very much for spending the time with us. We are so appreciative, and I really encourage people to get your books and read them, and it all will become much more clear. I also want to say that Michael is a movie star. We found out that he is going to be featured in an upcoming documentary film on permaculture called Inhabit. So we're going to put a link to that film on our Google group list. So congratulations, Michael. We all want your autograph.
I haven't seen it yet. I'm going Thursday night, so I'll see what it's like.
Okay, hopefully it's fantastic. Okay, so we're going to move on now to our next speaker. Now let's see if I can change the slides here. It looks like maybe I can. Let's see. Oh, maybe I can't. Oh, here we go. There's Barb. So Barb is our next guest today. She's from City Fruit in Seattle. And Barb grew up on an apple, pear, and cherry orchard where she learned how to pick fruit, can fruit, and make pies. So years later in Seattle, she was compelled to rescue a local neighborhood fruit trees. And those poor things were being choked by blackberries and ivy. Barb has volunteered with City Fruit as a lead steward for the Burke-Gilman Trail Urban Orchard since 2010, and she's going to tell us a little bit about rescuing old orchards. So Barb, welcome. Oh, let's see.
Thank you, Susan.
Oh, yay, you're here. That's wonderful.
Okay.
That's great. Okay, so we're going to go through slides, and I'd love it if you could tell me a little bit about how this all started. Tell me the beginning of the story of the Burke-Gilman Trail. How did you get involved?
Okay, well, I live in a neighborhood of Seattle where the Burke-Gilman Trail runs right through it, this from North Lake Union. And I guess in late 2000s, my son started going to elementary school nearby, and in order to walk to his school, we'd go on the Burke-Gilman Trail section there. And I wasn't looking for fruit trees, but when it was spring, I would notice that, oh my gosh, there's some apple blossoms, and oh, there's some other types of blossoms, because just from growing up on an orchard, even though I really didn't want to do orchard work anymore, I knew what the trees looked like. I knew what apple blossoms looked like. So I noticed along the trail there was a crabapple tree and a some other type of apple tree. And just on my own, just for something to do as I walked back from home from dropping my son off or going to pick him up, I'd cut away some of the blackberries in one case and English laurel in the other case to see what was underneath there. So I did that on my own with the support of the Parks Department, because technically the Burke-Gilman Trail is a park in Seattle. And I did that for a couple of years before getting involved with City Fruit, which started in 2010. Then I organized a volunteer group called the Burke-Gilman Trail Urban Orchard Stewards, and we started work parties in 2010. And so originally started with 6 trees.
Aha. Well, we're going to talk about the work that you've done. I'm going to see if I can change. There we go. So you mentioned that a big part of the work was invasive plants. Tell me a little bit about that. Why is that such a problem with these old trees?
Well, Seattle is pretty much host to the Himalayan blackberry. Wherever you go, any sort of land that's been disturbed or left for 10 minutes will have blackberries growing there. So that was what was primarily taking over the first tree I noticed. They're everywhere. They grow well. They're everywhere in Western Washington. I'll say that. Once you cross the Cascades, you don't see blackberries, Himalayan blackberries, but they grow into the trees. I never growing up. I never had to pick fruit with a hand pruner so I could cut the blackberry vines out. But that happens with some of these old trees before they've been cleared. But
Wow.
they take over the ground. They pretty much dominate everything that or choke out whatever is on the ground. So
And is this them here? Are we seeing a whole
yeah,
bunch of
those are
them?
mostly dead blackberry canes, or at least dead because that's took place in January. Yeah,
So
that's
are
a
you saying,
typical.
so you're saying basically that just to get at the trees to harvest them, the blackberries will get in the way.
Oh yeah, yeah. They grow up into the tree. They aren't as dangerous as say English ivy. They won't pull the tree down, but they'll um, make it dark. Of course, hard to deal with. Nobody likes to get all scratched up by blackberries. These have big canes and big I'm trying to say just barbs. So yeah, you get pretty scratched up dealing with blackberries.
And I would think they also take some of the nutrition that our lovely trees would be enjoying if they weren't gobbling up the nutrition as well in the soil.
Yeah, you would think so, but I'm surprised that the soil, once you've dug them up, the soil seems to be pretty good. So I'm thinking
Oh.
like many invasives or opportunistic weeds is another name for them, that they do add something to the soil.
So let's see what else we have here. Now, what is that picture?
So that's two of our orchard stewards in the Burke-Gilman. And one in Harriet on the right is holding what do we call a trophy sized blackberry corm or the root ball. So it took a while to get that out, and it's probably been cut down or mowed several times. It's been there for at least 10 years. But that's what you deal with after you've cut away the canes, is you need to dig out the root ball. And what the tool on the left was developed. It's called a weed wrench. It was developed to remove Scotch broom, but it works for bigger blackberries.
Well, I've never seen that before. So what's the secret to that tool? How does it work?
It's just leverage. It's just it's pretty heavy. It comes in different sizes. It's steel, and it's just got jaws that tighten up on near the base of the tree. Especially Scotch broom doesn't have a huge root system, so you can just yank it out of the ground really, very nicely. Works for small invasive trees or
Wow.
trees you want to remove. But yeah, it's pretty. I don't know. I think it's fun.
It's serious, serious business. Okay, so here's another trophy. I guess that's also, what is that?
Yes, that's Himalayan blackberry. That's a
Blackberry.
bigger one, but I mean that's not that unusual.
Whoever pulled it out lost their hand. They left their
Right.
hand on the ground
That
as
was
well. It was so hard to pull out.
just
Okay,
for scale.
and here, oh, there's the tool in action. Okay.
Right. So she's in fact there are two UW sorority sisters. They're dealing with um, Scotch broom
Right.
along the trail. That's a big one. You get tree-sized Scotch broom. The small ones you can just pull up by hand, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty rewarding.
It's hard work. Okay, let's see what else we've got. Oh, there we've got a little volunteer and Scotch broom, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so that's what we were getting rid of there. Now, what else? What are we looking at here?
Okay, this is another really not far from the other that snowy Scotch broom removal. This is just one of our original seedling trees on the Burke-Gilman. We haven't figured out who planted or how they got planted. Probably just apple cores because the railroad went right alongside here. But that's English ivy traveling up the trunks of the tree. There's some dead blackberry canes in the trees in the background, and then blackberries along the ground in the front there, that's green. And then on the right, lower right corner is cherry laurel.
Alrighty, so that's also stuff you were pulling out. Oh, here I have access. So, it just goes to show that I guess a big part of the muscle work was pulling out the invasives. So once you cleaned up the area around the trees, what are we doing here? What is the activity here?
Okay, well, we are at Woodland Park Zoo, and besides the zoo itself, they have a program for composting the uh, manure and bedding of the herbivores, say non-primate herbivores, I'll get this right, but the plant eaters at the zoo, and it's called Zoodoo. So there are two types of Zoodoo. One is primarily for annuals and vegetable gardens, and then they have another version called bedspread, where the bedding of the animals is added to get more more volume and more what am I trying to say? Just yeah, I think it's straw and leaves and small twigs. So that's what we're dealing. That's what we're shoveling here. The zoo donates some Zoodoo. Well, it does donate to our orchard program so that we get a truckload twice a year. They donate in spring and in fall. So that's what we're doing here. And these went
Okay.
to the Burt Gilman.
So basically, you've cleared your trees, and now what you're saying is we need to add nutrition back. These poor things have not really had anybody actively taking care of them for many years.
Correct.
So the first layer that you do is bringing in this wonderful Zoodoo, which I think here in Toronto we call Zoopoo, I think. I'm not sure. And all right, so that you guys brought this, and I guess you mulched around the trees with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I see wood chips, do I not?
Mm-hmm. We receive wood chips from Seattle Park's arborists. The City Fruit Orchard program is supported by Seattle Parks and Recreation, as we are primarily 95% of the time working on parks property. So they bring us arborist chips whenever it's requested, and then we get our volunteers, like this day when we had 1 inch of rain, they just load it and haul it around to our hill, or our, I was going to say, I'm thinking of our trees, which are often on slopes, and mulch around them. So that's what was going on here.
Okay, perfect. So here these trees are. They've been through a lot, and now they're getting lots of love and lots of nutrition. And now is time to prune them. Now, I know when I teach pruning, I really, really enjoy teaching pruning when we're working with younger trees, because I know that at that point when the tree is just in the ground or second or third year, it's such a great opportunity to shape the trees. You guys did not have that luxury. Can you tell me what is the strategy when pruning older trees that have been neglected for so long?
Well, these trees, and especially on the Burt Gilman, so many of them are seedlings. I mean, they really are just from a tossed apple core or something like that, somebody's lunch. So many of them were never pruned ever. So we have trees with multiple trunks. We have trees that are 35 feet tall, and depending on the growth aspect of the tree, they could be just great as an umbrella because there's no light that's coming through whatsoever. So they have different needs, but we first want to open up and get some light and ventilation, because we've learned that scab is a pretty common disease in Seattle with the rain we have. But by opening up and getting that light and ventilation in these trees, the scab outcome is improved greatly. It really improves from one year to the next.
That's incredible. Yeah, it just goes to show pruning is so good at preventing diseases in lots of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and in a minute we're going to see what the difference is with your pruning before and after, and it's quite incredible. So you pruned off some pretty big branches here.
Yeah,
huh?
right. Yeah, this was already there, but yeah, we don't anything this big we would not be doing. We do have support of the arborists from Seattle Parks, and they would do anything that requires
Whoops.
chainsaw.
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't mean to change it so quickly. So essentially, you didn't get those kids climbing the trees, did you?
No, I'm sure that was already there on the
That was already there. Okay. So basically, I just wanted to summarize with pruning, you guys are improving air circulation, basically, and improving access to light. I guess that's really what you can do. Perhaps you pruned off diseased branches.
Yes, generally we're pretty healthy, mostly dead. When you have neglected trees, there'd be a lot of dead wood. We do try to make them accessible. I mean, some trees like this one are not that big, and so we will uh, shape them as far as making them accessible by whatever ladders we have. We generally have 10-foot ladders, and try to. This is a good example. We have a tree between a parking lot and the Burke-Gilman Trail, which is like a freeway for bike riders and runners. So we have to keep the tree away from where people and vehicles are going to be. So we did quite
So
a bit of pruning there.
let's see what you did with it. This is the after picture. Okay, so that's a big difference. And this is the tree in bloom. So you guys, we can see how much work you've done.
Yeah, in
I'm
fact,
just,
since then we've removed another of those trunks because
oh, really?
it was just growing into the parking lot again. So
I guess that's the thing we need to remind everybody is mostly with older trees, you won't be pruning out more than 20 or 25% of the tree each year. Though here it looks like more because you're clearing out so much stuff that probably doesn't even belong here. So let's look at a delicious apple tree before, and here it is after. Sweet as anything, gorgeous. What a difference. It's unbelievable. And let's have a look. Gravenstein apple before, you can hardly see where the tree is.
those are all blackberries.
And there's the blackberries, and look at the sweet tree. So I'm just going to spin through a bit because we want to leave time for questions. So here's where it all started.
This is actually
And
one of our 2 heritage trees. This is a Ben Davis.
is this the same one?
Yes.
Yes. So there
With
it
a
is.
cherry behind it.
Look what you guys have done. So you've done a lot, and I'm sure if we could all applaud, we'd be applauding you right now because that's a lot of work. So here I had originally said what happened next because I know that you did another project, but it was kind of simultaneous.
Right. This is with
Yeah.
Amy Tennis Center Orchard, and it was started by this man here, Don Ricks, who gets everywhere in Seattle with fruit trees. But he and some community groups started clearing the trees at Amy Yee, which had trees that were planted during World War II when there was a defense housing project there. So it had fallen into disrepair. People didn't even know there were fruit trees there. So we've been working on it ever since 2008. We still have a couple trees that haven't been completely cleared.
Okay, well, I'd love to hear some questions. So I'm encouraging people to send in questions and also tell us if you have been working on your, older trees in your community. We'd love to hear from you. Also, people can also ask questions. Michael is still on the line. So while we wait for some more questions, Michael, if you're okay, I have a few questions for you.
Okay, you hear me?
Oh, good. There you are. Wonderful. So let me find. Well, somebody asked, what's your experience on nematodes?
I use them a little in my garden, but for anyone who is dealing with pests that pupate in the soil, and in those categories would be things like the plum cuculeo, the eastern European sawfly, and the apple maggot fly. If those are pests you're dealing with and you have particular trees where the pressure is heavy, applying nematodes at the time when they're found in the soil, going from larvae who just crawled into the pupa stage, those little tiny microscopic worms will parasitize those larvae, and you'll have less pressure the next year from those pests. But it's a question of knowing what's your pest and what's the timing of that larva to pupa migration into the soil.
Interesting. And the other question that I find very interesting here is, has there been any research into how those sprays that you talk about affect the health and effectiveness of pollinators like honeybees?
So what I'll speak to is neem with its azurdiractins does impact insects in the molting cycle. Now, any bee visiting the blossom is an adult, so they're beyond that. but I'm also aware that I don't want a bee carrying even a minute amount of something that might alter prospects back to the hive. So when I say there's an application made at pink and an application made at petal fall, I am not applying to open blossoms. So bees are not encountering that. So I have incredible diversity here in terms of native pollinators and mason bees and neighbors' honeybees and all sorts of bumblebees. So that's the one aspect of being aware that gets you beyond that.
Wow.
But it's important to think that way. It's good question.
Always be cautious, definitely. Always be cautious. I have a question here for Barb. Have you noticed more trail use since the pruning in 2011? So are people using and enjoying the trail more because it's not all scrubby?
Well, it's a very busy trail anyway. I mean, it is the sort of thing where bikes are speeding past. You really have to wait and look both ways before you cross the trail. But people are more engaged with what is alongside the trail. We do get a lot of bike riders that stop and ask what we're doing, especially when we're putting bags on the apples for pest control. But they've become more comfortable or more used to seeing us there. So definitely more engagement with what is alongside the trail rather than just speeding by.
Exactly, and hopefully picking the fruit as well.
Oh, for sure.
So, okay, so let's see. We've got our questions that happened. Now, this is nice. Max put together a list of some of the upcoming webinars we have, and you guys can see we have some really fantastic guests for our feature speakers, and we also have some missing slots. And I know there's a lot of very interesting people on the line with community orchard stories to tell who may want to do presentations. So you can talk to us. You can email orchard@actrees.org and suggest your idea of what to talk about in upcoming webinars. Definitely keep these dates in mind. Keep your time free and tell your friends. We'd love to have lots and lots of people on these calls and lots of input. So I just want to thank both of our wonderful speakers for their presentations. And I encourage everybody to continue the conversation on our Google Group forum where you can post a question. We can all answer you from our experience and we can discuss further. You should know that this webinar is being recorded. So if you have friends or family that missed it, we will soon send out a link to the recording so we can share it around and more of us can learn from this, from Michael and Barb's experience. Thank you so much. I think we are running out of time. I love this thank you slide. So thanks for joining us. Tune in again next month. I am so excited to be here with all of you guys, and we'll see you next time.